Today, I'm very happy to be here with somebody that works a lot with open science, Maria Cruz. She's a policy advisor at the Dutch Research Council, NWO, and there she developed a new funding scheme to encourage open science and reward and recognize the people that are at the forefront of this movement. Maria, thank you very much for being here. I have a couple of questions for you about open science. So you've been doing a lot about open science. So how did your passion begin? How did you become so passionate about open science?
Thank you, Alessandra. There wasn't a particular moment that triggered my interest and passion for open science. My research background is in astronomy, which is traditionally a very open discipline. So, as a scientist, I trained as a scientist in a culture where openness was the norm. In astronomy, a lot of the concepts of open science, at the time when I trained in astronomy, I wasn't aware of open science. I didn't even know I was doing open science. But all these concepts, open access, open data, citizen science, open source software, were things that we do in astronomy. Preprints, we share preprints. It's very common for astronomers to put their papers in the archive repository. There are many and vast archives of data that we can reuse. So sharing data is something that happens a lot in the field. And citizen science, of course, is age-old in astronomy, with amateur astronomers making contributions in some areas of the field. So I wasn't aware at the time, and when I became aware, it was something that just felt very natural and just a way to do things.
I like this idea that you are that for you doing open science was the norm. So, what do you think are now the most important motivation? How would you explain it to other people? The best motivation to do open science?
Yeah, open science is a very broad concept that includes a lot of different movements and practices. So there are many motivations to do open science. But as a funder, as a research funder, in my role now, I would highlight two. One is to make research findings accessible and reusable for everyone. As a research funder, we are funding research with taxpayers' money, so it's important that the results of what we fund are accessible for everyone who want to make use of them. And the other motivation from the point of view of a funder is to increase the efficiency of knowledge creation and dissemination by increasing collaboration and sharing of materials. So when we are funding something and the results are being shared, then we know they can be reused, and that increases the efficiency of the research process and research itself.
Yeah, this makes a lot of sense. And other funding bodies, for example, Horizon 2020, has some guidelines about openness, of course. And one of the most clear one is about data. And they say, okay, data should be as open as possible and as close as necessary. How do you see here the boundaries of open science?
Yes, of course, within open science, you want to see that research results and outputs and materials are as open as possible, and with the minimum amount of restrictions. But of course, there are situations where you may need to restrict access. Because of privacy reasons, you may want to protect people's identities, ethical reasons, national security even reasons, so safety reasons, intellectual property reasons. So there are situations where you may not be able to share the data or other materials. And some data are just too sensitive to share. So in those cases, there's also legislation. So in those cases, of course, those reasons supersede the openness. But there are ways you may not share the data, but you may share a description of the data, so that others know that that data exists. So even if you don't share the data, you may still share information about what the data is about and what the access restrictions are.
And already something like that would still help future researchers, for example, that want to find a similar data set and see that is possible.
It is possible, or sometimes you may not publish it, but you may make it available under certain conditions. Maybe you will only make it available to other researchers and they'll sign an agreement on how so there sometimes you don't just make it public, but it's still possible for others to use it under special conditions.
Yeah, it makes sense. So you are a policymaker, and before you have been involved in many roles within open science. You were data steward, right?
Yeah.
And data manager. So what are your recommendations for people that are responsible to push forward the open science movement around the world?
Yeah, actually, UNESCO, the United Nations Scientific, Educational and Cultural Organization, they adopted a recommendation on open science last year. It's an international framework for open science policy and practice, and they actually made a number of recommendations to be adopted by governments and around the world. And they make a lot of interesting recommendations, and then some of these we already do at NVO and in the Netherlands. I have to read a little bit from the list, but it's about promoting a common understanding of open science, so we all know what we're talking about. It's about developing policies, and for example, Dutch universities and the Dutch Research Council, NVO, we have open access policies, we have data management policies, so it's clear to researchers what are the rules they need to operate under. Invest in human resources and infrastructure and services. So if we are requiring researchers to make outputs open, we also then need to provide the training, the services to allow them to be able to do so without difficulty. It's also about foster a culture of open science and aligning incentives for open science. So making sure that when researchers make their outputs available, that they are also rewarded for doing so.
Yeah, that's also an important thing. Something that we see often is that there are some obstacles in doing open science, and recognition of doing it. It's an important part. So.
Yeah, I'd say, it's also recognizing, being aware that there are obstacles and try to remove those obstacles as much as possible.
Yes. And finally, so we have a cohort of participants to this MOOC. Do you have a word of advice to our participant on open science?
I mean, if they have the time, I'd really recommend reading the UNESCO recommendation on open science, because it's such a inspiring and instructive document. It was written by UNESCO, but they consulted open science experts from all over the world, so it's a very inclusive document. But it outlines a definition and shared values and principles for open science policy and practice. It's on the long side, but it's very clearly written. I'd really recommend reading it. It's very inspiring.
Okay, and maybe reading this UNESCO policy will help us do what you suggest, so having open science as the norm in the way we do things.
Yes, yeah. I think that's our goal, that open science becomes the norm.
Yes. Well, Maria, thank you very much. This was wonderful. I would like to thank you all for your attention, and I'll hope you enjoy the rest of the book.
Thank you. Thank you very much for having me.